6 months ago, I received an offer to join Jumpstart, and for the last 2 months, I've worked with Jumpstart's co-founders Kabir and Matthew to help shortlist the best candidates possible for future cohorts. In this time, I've learned a lot about what makes a great application. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all the things I wish I knew before I applied in the first place. I assume you already know who Jumpstart are, but if you don't, have a look at the video linked above. Today, I'll start by talking about the challenges I faced when I tried to find a job at a startup. Then I'll explain the 3 different types of profiles you have for successful Jumpstart graduates. Afterwards, I'll go through 10 tips for submitting the best application possible. My first 6 tips will look at the CV, my 7th tip will look at the interview, and my final 3 tips will be focused on how to deliver the best pitch possible. So let's get into it. When I graduated from uni, I decided I wanted to work at a startup. But I quickly discovered it's a lot harder to get into a startup than what I thought it would be. The challenge is there isn't a clear pathway into a startup in the same way there is to get into an investment banking job or a consulting job. I had no idea what hiring managers were looking for. On top of that, applications are extremely competitive. Most candidates don't even get to the interview stage. Plus, my final round for Jumpstart involved a pitch, and I'm not very good at doing pitches, so I had to learn how to deliver one. So the most important thing I learned about Jumpstart is that startup roles are quite ambiguous and they don't match up to traditional corporate roles. Funding is finite, teams are lean, and the members within that team often wear multiple hats. Therefore, it's useful to consider what skills you have and the profile you might fit, rather than just looking at the role you see yourself in. There are broadly 3 types of profiles which graduates fall into. The first is the quantitative analyst. This person usually has a STEM degree. They have a lot of programming experience and they might be proficient in Microsoft Excel, Tableau, SQL, and databases. The kind of roles this person would get would include data analyst or a front-end or a back-end developer. The second profile is a quantitative generalist. This person is very good at communicating orally, written, and verbally. They have a very high emotional quotient, so they can read situations really well. But on top of that, they approach problems from a quantitative angle. They take a very process-based approach. Some of their roles might include product design or product management, maybe operations and customer service. The third profile is the business development specialist. Now, this person usually has an arts or a humanities degree. They have excellent communication skills and they feel very comfortable in front of the client. These people have a demonstrated track record of delivering results. Roles might include an account executive, someone that works in sales, or maybe someone that works in marketing. I identify as somewhere between a quantitative generalist and a business development specialist. So once I understood that, I could look at the job requirements for those roles, and then I could tailor my application to highlight the same strengths I was seeing in those job requirements. Long story short, have a think about those profiles, have a think about your skills, and how you can really showcase them on your application. So that being said, in my opinion, the CV is the most important part of the application. And the reason why is because it's the first impression the recruiter is going to have of you. There's no online testing, it's literally the CV, and then if you meet the requirements, you go to the interview stage. I screened more than 600 CVs for Jumpstart, and here are the things which I picked up that successful candidates were doing. Tip number 1 is make your academics as simple and easy to read as possible. Show your degree, classification, uni, and dates that you attended. I wouldn't list out modules for the sake of it, just because it takes up valuable space. If, however, you performed really well on a certain module and you want to highlight that, then definitely include it. That's going to make you stand out. Tip number 2 is if you've worked for a startup in any capacity, explicitly say it. Startup experience is going to go a really long way in your application because it's so hard to get startup experience at all. Don't assume the recruiter is going to take the time out to look at the company on Google and find out if it's a startup or not. Was that startup at an early stage? Was it backed by venture capital? What industry was that startup in? Tip number 3 is to show how you added value. Qualifying your achievements with numbers is a really good way to define and show a measurable impact from some of the work that you've been doing. This is a tip which I know Google use when they're hiring for their candidates. An example of that is you could talk about, I grew sales by 20% from restructuring the website's API. And that shows really clearly what you did and the impact it had, because it also qualifies it with a number. It's not like a very wishy-washy kind of phrase. Tip number 4 is Excel and PowerPoint is really important. The reason why it's important is because it's used almost all the time at a startup. If you can talk about how you've used Excel or PowerPoint to problem solve or to look at the bigger picture, the so what from a problem, it's gonna go a really long way to showing the recruiter the kind of candidate that you are. Don't rank your skills in a chart. Some candidates like to say that they're 8 out of 10 at one thing and like 6 out of 10 at something else. I don't like that because I think your skills aren't fixed, they're always going to change, and you're also drawing attention to your weaknesses as well as your strengths, and you kind of want to focus on your strengths. Tip number 5 is if you founded a small business or an initiative, no matter how small it is, whether it's a charity, blog, or even a YouTube channel, then definitely mention that. It's super important because it shows that you're a self-starter, and that's what a startup is looking for. Tip number 6, highlight any leadership experience you have in university societies. If you're a course rep, highlight that as well. Be as specific as possible with your extracurricular activities. Talk about where you traveled or how much money you fundraised for charity. What did you do in your role for that society? Instead of just name dropping, be really specific with what you did because it says a lot about who you are. CV's out the way now. Tip number 7 is use storytelling in your interview as a way to connect with your interviewer and to very naturally draw attention to your strengths. So when I storytell, I use the STAR method to demonstrate key competencies, and STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. What was the situation you were in? What was the task you were given? What was the action that you took? And then what was the result of that? I like to prepare 5 examples that are applicable to a number of different competencies. So when an interviewer asks me a question, I've got this selection of stories in my head that I can choose from, and whichever one fits best is one that I'm going to retell. So there are 3 competencies which I think are important. The first one is entrepreneurship, the second one is proactivity, and the third one is to take ownership. Entrepreneurship doesn't mean you have to have started a business. It could be a project or organizing an event for a society. I think understanding proactivity is like showing how you identified a problem, that you're able to break down that problem into smaller steps. You could identify patterns in those smaller steps, and then afterwards take the initiative to make some kind of action that led to a meaningful result. That would go a long way to demonstrating proactivity. I think taking ownership is also important because my startup manager told me that when he looks to hire people, he wants to see juniors who can take ownership and deliver results. So what does taking ownership mean? Taking ownership means you're able to research something, you're able to understand the requirements of it, you're able to design a solution, you're able to end-to-end test, get user feedback. Really what it's talking about is you can shape and grow an idea. Even if you didn't do all of those things I just said, just some of them, that's an example of taking ownership. The last thing to note is that the recruiter really wants to understand your thought process behind answering questions. So, especially for technical questions, always talk about how you arrived at your answer rather than just stating the answer, because it might be right or wrong, but it's the process that matters more than the solution. Delivering a pitch is something I'd never properly done before Jumpstart. It actually made me a little bit nervous. So I got advice from a different startup manager who does pitches for a living. Here are some of the pointers he gave to me. Tip number 8 is use Prezi or Canva templates to make really beautiful presentations in a very small amount of time. It's very easy to learn these tools, and I think they're a much better alternative to PowerPoint. Tip number 9 is tailor the presentation to your audience. Make it feel as personal to that person as you possibly can. So that means working through the requirements in the brief given to you, just literally ticking off, am I answering exactly what they're looking for? It also means practicing the pitch with a friend. Try timing yourself, or practicing the pitch in front of a camera so you get more comfortable. Last but not least, tip number 10, keep it short and sweet. Avoid having lots of words in the slides, and if there's numbers and figures involved, try and present that in a very clear, uncomplicated way. If you don't know much about an area, don't mention it because you're inviting your audience to ask you questions about that at the end. It's also useful to think about possible questions and how you might answer them. So a good way to do that is by delivering a pitch to a friend and asking that friend if they've got any questions. Some of the questions I practiced with a friend did come up in my interview, and I felt so much more comfortable just to go like bang. I just delivered the answer there and then. So that's all I've got for you today. I hope it made things a little bit clearer. If you've still got some questions, just drop a comment down below. I promise I will reply to it. I'm a very small channel, and if I can help someone in any way, then that would be amazing. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.